Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? I hope you're all enjoying the series of the legacy albums by artists. We'll get back to that after this episode, but today I want to talk to you about the craft recordings from the Contemporary Records label that are coming up. And we're not going to talk about the craft editions necessarily. We're going to more be addressing the music on these records and some thoughts and feelings I have and just some overall surprises, I guess. First one we're going to talk about today is Shelly Manne and His Friends, Volume 2, which is sometimes labeled on the back. This one's not actually, but which is just a continuation of Shelly Manne and His Friends, Volume 1. And they're playing songs from My Fair Lady. And of all the records, of the 6 that they're re-releasing, this is the one that most floors me. I don't know why this is being reissued. The music's fine. It's not great. Music's fine. But on Discogs alone, there's 500 copies of this record right now on Discogs. 500. That might include some CDs. I didn't clear that field. But this is a record that record stores will just throw in on one of your purchases when you buy online. I got 2 copies myself because I was gifted one. It's going for 50 cents, $1, $5 for old mono stereo pressings of it. It obviously sold really well. Shelly Manne is a leader of the West Coast scene. I'll give you a little taste of it here. Shelly Manne's a fantastic player with a top of the mark pedigree. The biggest problem I have with this record, Leroy Vinnegar on the bass is a fantastic bass player, and it's just a trio setting. My issue here is Andre Previn. He leaves me cold. Previn's European. He might have been born in Algeria, if I remember. But he's a fine player, but he also has a lot of European classical training in him. And so there's this kind of a stiffness, rigidity, a lack of soul, perhaps. And not in in an insulting way, but just like there's just something that leaves me. He's got quite a few records on Contemporary. I have most of them. I find him to be like a very eloquent player, a very sophisticated player. There's just a blues element missing in his playing for me that leaves me cold, leaves me kind of, I rarely feel that thing that I feel in jazz that makes me love jazz so much. That being said, the record sold really well. I was born in Berlin, actually, Andre Previn. Sorry, Germany. So who was the one that was born in Algeria? Can't remember right now. But anyway, again, Shelly and Leroy are great players, and Andre's a great player too. And if this was a rare record and hard to find, I'd say, well, I guess it makes sense to reissue it. But the fact that there's 500 copies on Discogs alone, not including Amazon, not including eBay, not including already other issues of this that are available in print, I'm not sure why they're including this. Someone in the comments of my last episode said Jack, or whatever his name was, is just issuing titles that he likes. But that seems to indicate something to me. It used to be that when records were being reissued from the jazz canon, they were carefully selecting titles that were really hard to find, that there was a need for that record to be repressed. The only copies out there were hundreds of dollars because they were so rare, and there were never that many copies to begin with. This record proliferated the music industry. The record store was reissued numerous times, and like I said, it's out there in abundance. I've gone through so many stores online and in person, but online especially the last few years, and stores will have multiple copies of this. Again, it swings. You got Shelly and Leroy making sure that happens. And he's got a delicacy and an intricacy, Previn, that's very astute. Like he's a good player. There just seems to be an element of the blues missing. And the blues, unfortunately, isn't something that you can really teach. I mean, you can learn some blues progressions, but the blues isn't necessarily about the chords and the progressions. The blues is about the feeling you put into that. And that basic framework is about me finding the to make it happen that needs to come out of my soul. So Previn aside, and there's a lot of Previn on Contemporary, like I said, I was shocked to see this was part of the reissue program. Shocked. Mostly because of just how many copies are out there for under $10. So I think you'd be very much remiss, sorry reissue guys, to buy this for any kind of reissue cost. Because there's old monos out there, old stereos out there for $10 and less. But what it kind of says to me is that these reissue catalog companies are getting very much less concerned with stock of old catalog out there. That seems to be what's happening. Is they're just counting on the fact that most of these consumers who are buying vinyl today are only looking at new titles, and if it's not being reissued, it doesn't exist to these people. There can be 500 used copies of it. It doesn't exist on their radar. But if one of the new reissue series puts it out, it's like, oh, that must be an important record. And that's saying something about the consumer. That they're somewhat uneducated. Not just in terms of even just the music, but even how to shop. I mean, a lot of these records were pressed in high volumes, especially when you're talking about a label like Contemporary. But nevertheless, this is part of the series. It's an enjoyable Sunday afternoon listen. Is one of the 6 most pressing reissues that Contemporary needs to have available? No, it's not in the top 75 Contemporary records that need to be reissued. So that's where we're at with that. The second title in this reissue series that I want to talk about today is Benny Carter's Jazz Giant. And first, let's talk about Benny Carter a little bit. Benny Carter is a legend. He goes back into the 20s. He was a part of the swing era, one of the great composers and arrangers of jazz throughout its history. He might even still be alive today. Jean-Michel, is he still with us? I know he had a career that spanned 70, 80 years in the jazz industry. He played alto sax predominantly, and along with Parker, was one of the real innovators in the alto. But midway through the 30s or so, he picks up the trumpet and has the duality of trumpet alto sax for quite a stretch. And I think he finally leaves the trumpet in his later years. But you don't really see that alto trumpet combination from players very often. Usually you guys have a woodwind combination where they might play flute and sax, alto and tenor. You know, those things are common. Percussion guys might play the vibes and the piano, or the vibes and the drums. Instruments that are related. The trumpet and the alto sax are quite different. One being brass, one being woodwind. Very different embouchures, very different breathing responsibilities. So it's an interesting choice to have. Of course, Ornette Coleman attempts that as well, to pick up the trumpet kind of mid-career, leaving one of the least desirable blue notes in my mind. I guess, is it the Jackie McClain where he shows up? New Gospel? And Ornette brings the trumpet, and no one was really thrilled about that development. I think it's called New and Old Gospel, if I remember right. But Benny is such an institution, and he's one of the most undervalued people in today's industry. He was highly respected in the game, led bands of his own for a long time, while guys like Duke and Basie and Lionel Hampton get a lot of the credit. Benny Carter was one of the most innovative voices in composition and arrangement. What you have here is a nice recording of him in a smaller setting in 1935, 55, probably 1957 here, 58 perhaps. But part of what makes this record special is Ben Webster is kind of a co-star here, and Webster's one of the great breathy tenor players of jazz history. He's just like an iconic, beautiful player. And then you add in guys like Frank Rosolino on the trombone, and Frank's one of the great trombone players of all time. Top 5 in terms of skill and ability, virtuosity. Rosolino's just a player. You have Jimmy Rowles on the piano with Andre Previn on some tracks. Again, Previn was a real prominent figure at Contemporary Records, like Shelly Manne. Then you got Barney Kessel on the guitar. And for me, Barney Kessel is probably the third big attraction behind Ben and Benny himself. Then you have Leroy Vinegar and Shelly Manne. So you actually have the same kind of backing rhythm section here at times with Previn, Vinegar, and Manne backing these guys with Webster and Carter and Kessel. Kessel's just great on this. Great West Coast guitar player. One of the members of the Wrecking Crew, so just had a real diverse vocabulary on the guitar. He's playing some nice, long, clean notes with a nice, bright, sharp tone. You got to love Barney Kessel. He's just a real beautiful player. Again, Rosalino's always a revelation as well. But once again, here we find ourselves with a record that's not that hard to find. I just quickly looked on Google, on Discogs, and there's over 120 copies of this on vinyl available. And a lot of them are from Europe and Japan, but there's plenty of copies right here in America that are from $7 to $12 to $20. You can get a very good plus, for $12. Old copy. It's gonna be beautiful. And I don't understand sometimes the choices these guys are making. Again, Carter is very worthy of this honor. And again, there's going to be a lot of people who buy it because, it's a new reissue. This must be one of the best jazz records of all time. I don't understand how we got to this place where if it's not a modern repressing of something, it has no interest to people. I don't get that. It's so strange to me. Over 100 copies of this. Again, I could find you 50, 60 contemporary titles, infinitely harder to find than this one, that are deserving of a repress. And I guess this is just the first batch of 6. But again, it's a pretty, I want to say it's a safe choice because it's a really great record. Kessel, again, and Webster are just fantastic along with Benny Carter. And again, Carter's one of the truly forgotten greats. It's a name that gets thrown around a lot, forgotten great. But Benny Carter is truly one of the most elite people in this industry that the average person today is just completely forgotten about, which of course is sad. So number 3 on this list is Art Pepper Meets the Rhythm section. I just did a Legendary Legacy Records episode on this record, so I'm not going to dive too deep into this. Of course, it's the legendary Miles Davis Rhythm section on the West Coast, finding time to record a session with Art Pepper. Pepper was hungover, strung out, hadn't been playing much the last 6 months, and they show up together and record some real magic. And again, if you want more in depth on that, a few episodes back I do a whole episode on this record. It's a very great session with surprisingly lively Pepper, given the state of condition that he was in when he showed up. And he even showed up late for the session, so he was not in best condition whatsoever. Now here's a record that last record it's getting tougher to find. Here's Art Pepper plus 11, number 3568. And if you're a contemporary records collector like I am, I have most of the first 100 titles. I think the first 75 consecutively I have, and there's probably about 5 titles I'm missing from the last 25 in the first 100. So like number 76 I'm missing. There's like 3 or 4 titles in the 3590s. And with contemporary, anything that's 35 is going to indicate mono. So 3568 means it starts at 3500, and that means it's the 68th mono release. And then for stereo, they went to the 7068. They just doubled the 35 into a 70. That means stereo. So stereo 7068 is the same as mono 3568. That should clear that up. So if you're looking for old contemporaries, 3500 sequence is mono, 7000 sequence is stereo, and they're pretty much synonymous, sound pretty much the same. And even the stereo mono thing's a bit overblown to me. Most people don't have 2 different cartridges, 2 different styles. Stereo's going to sound just as good, if not better, than mono in a lot of cases. I do love the old monos. They're often all old war horses that play through everything. This is Bernie's doing a song I'm a big fan of. There's lots of great versions of this song. Hank D'Amico, the clarinetist, does a version of this on Bethlehem that I think is just wonderful. So just for comparison's sake, that My Fair Lady, Shelly Manne, Andre Previn, over 400 of those records that was out of the 500 were on vinyl. The Benny Carter has over 100 copies available. I didn't look up Meets the Rhythm section. I know that one's getting tougher to find. But even this Art Pepper plus 11 here has 109 copies of this on Discogs right now. Right now. And a lot of those are going to be, of course, Japanese, some in Europe, But you'll be able to find this in an American pressing for a decent price. If you want to wait for the craft class, by all means. You know what I mean? I'm not discouraging people from buying reissues. It's just funny how much it's changed to the point where the average jazz collector today only is looking for what's being reissued on jazz this month. They're not even looking at used records. It's just mind blown. This is an interesting record, though, in part because of plus 11 means there's a big band happening here. But they're still playing in a very modern post-bop kind of setting. You have some pretty incredible players on here. Art Pepper, Pete Candoli, and Jack Sheldon. I love Sheldon. Dick Nash, trombone. Bob Edwardson, tenor sax. Valve trombone. Vinny DeRosa's on the French horn. Herb Geller, fantastic altoist. Billy Perkins on the tenor sax, big fan of Bill. Med Flory on the baritone, who actually has a cool record on Jubilee, believe it or not. Russ Freeman on the piano, a great West Coast player. And Joe Mondragon on the bass and Mel Lewis on the drums. So it's a big West Coast group. They're doing a tribute here to Monk and Treasury of Modern Jazz Classics by Gillespie, Geoffrey, Monk Mulligans, Parker Rollins, and Horace Silver. It's arranged by Marty Peisch. And so what you have here is these West Coast white cats acknowledging a lot of the great music that's being composed and arranged very much on the modern fringes of jazz. Gillespie, he's a very modern player who's tackling some interesting sound innovation. Joffrey's one of the most modern players with the beginnings of avant-garde in the mid-50s. Monk's approach is groundbreaking and shattering. Jerry Mulligan is the leader of the Birth of the Cool and one of the great composers and arrangers and most in-demand arrangers in jazz in the 50s. Everyone wanted Mulligan to write their charts. Parker, of course, one of the great innovators. Rollins, one of the great players. Horace Silver, of course, is one of the great leaders as well in the kind of hard bop, edges of the rhythm and blues going on. So they're really tackling a lot of the cool, innovative sounds here in the music with a really big ensemble. It's a great record. Again, it's not that tough to find. It's tough compared to My Fair Lady, but still a lot of pressings are out there of these records. And I would have to guess on some level, this is why these records haven't been reissued to this point. They were saying to themselves, we can't reissue this contemporary stuff. There's too many pressings out there on the secondhand used market in order for us to do that. And I think they finally got to the realization where it doesn't matter. A lot of these collectors aren't buying old used records. They don't understand that most of those records are absolutely beautiful and playable. Maybe they realize that people aren't even looking for old used records. It's a bit of a brain fuck for me, if I'm honest. Why would you reissue a record with 400 copies out there on vinyl? I'm not sure. I don't know. Shelly Man, the Poll Winners. This is a great series of records, the Poll Winners. There's 4, maybe 5 records in this set. I think there's 4, and they might have released a 5th one decades later of tracks that were kind of in the vault or whatever. But what you're dealing with here is by Poll Winners. They're talking about 3 of the guys who keep winning the jazz polls as the best on their instrument. And Ray Brown is absolutely one of the elite bass players of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. He kind of goes under the radar some to today's collectors because he wasn't part of the hard bop scene on Blue Note and Prestige. He was more backing the Verve canon with Oscar Peterson and company and Jazz the Philharmonic. He's working with Norman Granz. And of course, by the 70s and 80s, he becomes one of the leading voices in jazz in terms of even promotion and concert event booking, helping careers stay alive. Ray Brown was a very prominent, important figure and one of the wealthier figures in jazz as well. He helped prolong a lot of careers and shed light on some new young talent as well. But it's his bass playing that's so preeminent. He's just a clean tone, middle of the fret. He always enunciates real clean. Ray's just a brilliant player, and he obviously won a number of jazz polls back in the day. Barney Kessel, the aforementioned guitar player, won a lot of polls, as did Shelly Man on drums. And so you got The brother Ray with the two white guys from the East Coast playing as the poll winners. And one of the things about contemporary, which is somewhat true for a lot of the other labels as well, but it's very inbred. Shelly Manne shows up on a lot of sessions, led by him or not led by him. Castle shows up on a lot of records. Ray Brown, not as much. He wasn't really a contemporary guy. He was more of an LA Verve, that era kind of guy. But he's definitely on these poll winner records always. The poll winner record was very successful, which led to a Volume 2, a Volume 3, a Volume 4, all in quick succession. By that I mean probably from 57 when that one comes out, probably to about 59, those first 4 poll winners all show up. And they're all fantastic records, all wonderfully recorded. One of the things that people love about contemporary records is the sound quality of the original recording sessions. Few labels get more praise than Lester Konig's Contemporary Records for having an incredible sound with Roy Dunan at the desk, engineering and producing these incredible sounding sessions. So unlike some of the labels where you might be like, well, the originals don't sound fantastic, so we're going to reissue them for that purpose, it's going to be hard for even the best modern day record plants, the best modern day technology, for me in my case, to pass the superior quality of what Contemporary did on a regular, consistent basis. So what are you really offering here to the public that's going to be unique and different? Once again here, this record has nearly 100 copies on vinyl on Discogs alone. So there's probably another couple dozen at least on eBay. There's probably some on Amazon. There's got to be dozens, if not hundreds of copies in record stores around the world. So none of these records are really that hard to find. When you reissue old Blue Note, or for that matter, old Bethlehem, old Savoy, a lot of those records are impossible. And in fact, there's contemporary records that are really hard to find. Just happens to be none of these 6 fit that bill. And maybe they're just trying to whet people's appetite and draw people in. But Contemporary was a West Coast LA-based, white predominantly label that had more money, more resources, more distribution by a mile compared to a Prestige or a Blue Note or an Argo in Chicago. Those labels that were recording black, they had very limited distribution, very limited resources. There wasn't like this entire U.S. college scene where you could go send a bunch of young black hardball players to play the American colleges, the Ivy League schools. Those records don't exist. Art Blakey live at Harvard, that's not out there. You know what I mean? Curtis Fuller at Columbia, doesn't happen. The White Cats got to play the college scenes from Oberlin to the West Coast to Caltech, and a lot of those records show up on Contemporary, honestly, and Fantasy and Pacific. Those white-run West Coast labels had this entire new sound that was very popular in the colleges and just opened up a real stream of revenue for these guys to have this built-in touring scene to go to the U.S. colleges and play for all the hip cats. And so Contemporary had a much broader swath and much broader distribution, which is why there's so many more of these records out there. I mean, they're almost a mid-major. They're almost like a Verve, where the distribution is far more national and far more copies are out there. You know, the runs were much bigger pressings and hit much more of the country and are still out there in the cracks, sounding great. And OJC also was a big part of the Contemporary story. And OJC reissues almost all of these titles in the 80s and 90s on vinyl. And those were sourced from the original analog tapes. OJCs sound great. OJCs were reissued for $4.98, $5.98 in the 80s and 90s. They've since escalated to the point where they're $20 or $30 now. But again, it kind of says to you, why are these records being reissued? Why is the demand? Again, it just makes you realize that it only says that a lot of these collectors today don't know how to buy used vinyl. Even the covers of a lot of these Contemporary records tell you a lot about these men. Okay, this is not Blakey and the Jazz Messengers living in the New York ghettos, you know what I mean, and the black musicians struggling to even get a car. These guys are golfing. They got leisure time. You know, a lot of these contemporary records take place on beaches, you know, overlooking LA. Again, it's not in any way a slight on who they were. It's just the fact of the history of American politics. But find me a record with 4 black jazzmen in 1957 golfing together. Find me that. And then Hampton Oz right there, he's actually a young mixed fella who was a big part of the early scene in LA. He was playing on Central Avenue for a while, if memory serves. Here he's playing with Barney Kessel, Shelly Manne. Those names keep coming up, don't they? And Red Mitchell, the great bass player. Red and his brother Whitey Mitchell were 2 red-headed American-born bass players that were big parts of the West Coast scene predominantly, especially Red. Red has a number of great records as a leader, a couple on Bethlehem, one in Contemporary. He's a couple other 2, and Whitey has a couple on ABC. Fantastic bass players. And Red shows up on a lot of these sessions as well, along with Leroy Vinegar and Curtis Counts. And Contemporary has a pretty good solid lineup of bass players. But again, Shelly Manne shows up on so many of these contemporary records. It's really it's almost like this guy had a business model, part of the, you know what I mean, was he part owner? I don't think he was, but Shelly Manne was definitely a successful, popular name. And sometimes just putting his name on these records probably helped propel them. This is 35-53, so it probably puts it 1957, maybe 58. January 27, 58. So right on that cusp there. A great group. Shelly. So that's Red on the outside. That's Hampton. That's got to be Kessel in the background there. And that's Shelly Manne. 4. Thus the title 4. Nice collection of songs. Yardbird Suite's on this one. There Will Never Be Another You. Sweet Sue, Like Someone in Love. Great song selection. A lot of it from the, American Songbook. This is a really nice record, honestly. But once again, I don't think it's that hard to find. Let me go see. So even this copy has 47 records available on Discogs right now to purchase. All priced affordably. These aren't Blue Note prices. I mean, they're just too common to be having those outlandish prices on them. You can get old original pressings for $20-$30 in great shape. So this one has 47 copies of this one right there. There's Kessel, just a bright, clean player, enunciates very precisely. There's a delicacy, but a control to his playing that's wonderful. Kessel's really a guy deserving more credit today. The experts know who Barney Kessel is. You know, his catalog and his side work are unmatchable in some ways. You know, he's just got a body of work that's immense. And he's a bit like Wes Montgomery, just a great player that can come from many different directions. Grant Green's kind of more monotone, single notes, playing kind of bebop on the guitar in the Charlie Christian kind of vein. A guy like Kessel might play you a bunch of chords, strum some color, brush the strings with his hand. Next song, I might be playing some fast licks like this. Kessel has a really wide range to his abilities. So all 6 of these contemporary titles are great titles. The lone exception might be My Fair Lady. Again, it's not a bad record. It's a good record. It's just Previn, again, leaves me slightly cold at times. But it's a record that they're also readily available. You could go on Discogs today and with shipping, get all these records for under $100 easily. And I'm guessing that, I don't know what the reissues are going to go for, but my guess is $30, $35, $40. So you're going to pay for 3 of those on the reissues, which you could pay for all 6 of the originals. This is not to discourage people from buying the reissues, and I'm not trying to do a disservice to craft. It's a good thing they're reissuing this stuff because it does put light on this label and will increase its value in most collectors' minds. But why have we gotten to this place now where it takes something to be reissued for it to have any value in today's collectors' heads? That's something I can't get my head around. Throughout the 90s and the 2000s, you were like, oh, cool, they reissued that. But you already knew about it. You might have already had it, you know? And for me, it's part of why I don't talk about these reissues a lot, because I have most of the records already. So I'm not that out like gaga, like, oh, this is being reissued. Once in a while, they'll reissue something like, oh, I've been wanting that for a long time. But Contemporary alone has a lot of records that are much tougher to find than these. I'm guessing they're going to be coming in upcoming packages, but I don't know that for sure. I'm kind of half tempted to pull out 6 records right now by Contemporary. I feel like they should have reissued. And maybe I'll do that on my next episode. You guys want to see the Jazz Shepherds 6 Contemporary records that need to be repackaged? I can pull you out 6 that are a lot tougher to find than these 6. Again, maybe just trying to wet the whistle and get the appetite going so people want to buy some deeper titles. But there's some deeper titles that are just outstanding. And the fact that even the Ornette Coleman and the Sonny Rollins and some of those preeminent East Coast names aren't getting any acknowledging in this first series. Again, it's a little surprising that one of the Ornette Coleman records didn't make it into this mix, or Rollins Way Out West. But those records are also fairly easy to come by. Way Out West has probably 100 copies out there, I bet you easily, which is going to be the case for a lot of these. I bet you the Jimmy Duker record has only a dozen copies or so out there. That's a tough one to find. There is some early Contemporary stuff that's fairly difficult to come by. And they also didn't really seem to touch on the early Howard Rumsey, that first 25, 30 records on Contemporary that are kind of more connected to the early 50s and the late 50s. And a lot of that early 50s stuff was on 10-inch, and then got repackaged on the 12-inch LP 3500 sequence. And they don't really touch on any of that here. It's all kind of more 57, 58 that they're delving into here. And again, someone posted on my last episode that the fellow behind this reissuing is just picking 6 titles that he liked. So Dwayne Quattro wasn't part of that mix for him, I guess. Lenny Niehaus didn't make the cut. He was more into these more probably commercially viable attempts from the 57, 58 era. But early Contemporary, there's some really good cutting edge stuff there that's pretty ignored by a lot of people. All great stuff, all worthy of having. And like I said, I have most of the initial 3500 sequence. It moves into 3600 at that point, and it starts to thin out there for me because we're moving into the 60s. And they're even doing stuff like Cecil Taylor. Like they're not afraid to tackle some of the edges of the music at Contemporary. And Contemporary lasts a long time. They're still putting records out in the 80s. As I just talked about this one I found in Chicago, Ray Brown playing Lester Young, Something for Lester. What an amazing record that was. It floored me. It was just beautiful. But I'm just trying to capture a little bit of the afterglow of these reissue program episodes that everybody seems to be getting so many views on. The Jazz Shepherds just trying to dip his toe in that a little bit. And instead of doing you a review of these records after they come out, I'm giving you the preview before they show up. So great records, mostly between West Coast cool and what I call cool bop. Mid-tempo, some up-tempo, but it's more mid-tempo. Maybe a bluesy ballad here and there. But these guys tend to play more of that mid-tempo to up-tempo most of the time. They don't spend a lot of time with the blues. They don't spend a lot of time on really slow ballads. There are some. And they don't really spend a lot of time going lightning fast either. There's some examples of that here. But honestly, I found like the most aggressive these white West Coast cats really get is on those Bethlehem records. Charlie Mariano and Frank Rosalino and the Williamson brothers. That series of records on Bethlehem with some of the same musicians even. They just seem to really be able to go breakneck speed and are unfettered completely at Bethlehem when they're recording those sessions in 56, 55, 57. Great stuff. And a lot of the West Coast stuff is very interchangeable. So that means if you're going to get a Pacific session, a contemporary session, some of those Bethlehem West Coast sessions, you're going to get a lot of the same rhythm players, piano players, bass players. It's a pool of talent. And most of them are under contract here or there. But I might be under contract here. It means I can still get my sidemen from all the other pool. So you get a lot of crossover, a lot of the same talent, which leads to a fairly consistent sound in the mid to late 50s and West Coast. And it's not nearly as cool as people think it is. Cool has a certain kind of mid-tempo to slow tempo, samba, laid back. The stuff's a lot more aggressive, a lot more bright, and more attacking than that cool moniker gives credit to. So, great stuff. Big fan of contemporary, big fan of Lester Connick, big fan of Roy Dunan. The whole thing was an incredible adventure that lasts decades. The money was just a different thing for contemporary versus a Blue Note. And contemporary was the one out there buying up labels, not being bought up. If you think of the fate of the Blue Notes and the Prestiges and the Savoys and the Bethlehems even, most of these labels get absorbed by other labels at points. They just sell, and the bigger label swallows them up, and they become part of that imprint. Contemporary was buying other labels and adding them to their family, which is in large part why Contemporary is the house that built OJC. OJC, along with Fantasy, these labels were the big kind of backbone that helps them absorb Riverside, helps them absorb Prestige, Debut, some of the other smaller labels that they absorb, and OJC becomes this wide package of a big part of the sound of the 50s and jazz, all under one rooftop. And that's one of the things about the OJC series, is they maintain the album covers, they even maintain the initial label artwork and graphics. The only thing they change is the numbers. So you don't get the old Prestige number, you don't get the old Riverside number, you don't get the old Contemporary number. They're all reassigned new OJC numbers. OJC is probably the greatest reissue program in jazz history. And when you're buying stuff from those labels, always see what you can find from the OJC series first, because the pricing can't be beat. Y'all be safe. You have a great day. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to follow the channel, please hit that bell, hit the like button, and then subscribe if you haven't. If you want to help support the channel, it's always appreciated. You can go to the merch store, grab a t-shirt, grab a hoodie, grab a coffee cup, or you can just go to the Patreon page and pledge as little as $3, $4, $5 a month to help support the channel and show your appreciation and love for this music, and to help support me to be able to continue making these episodes and this content for people, because I feel like what we offer here on this channel is unique. It's not just about pressings and the grams, and we try to talk about the musicians and the underlying emotion and the history and the what's driving the art. So we try to attack it from a different approach, and we always want to look at what the musicians are about, not just. I was talking with my friend in Newcastle yesterday, Neil Bilton. He owns a record store over there. It's amazing how many people review a record, and they can review all the details about the vinyl and the reissuing and all that, who's behind it, Kevin Gray, all these names. They never once talk about the music. They won't even discuss the history of the musician, who this guy was, where he came from, who would he play with. Without that context, it's also vast, like just vacuous. There's no context to connect the dots. It's great to know who a guy played with and what his roots were and who influenced him and who he influenced, so that the jazz canon can shrink in your mind's comprehension of it. It's a very interwoven fabric. I mean, jazz spiderwebs in every direction from every artist you get into. But when there's no surrounding cloud of information to connect that tissue, it's all very nebulous and vacuous and dark and mysterious. And it almost makes the jazz universe seem unapproachable. Too great for me to understand in my lifetime. And it's not that unapproachable. There's 24 labels that each made 100 to 400 records or so. A bunch of smaller little labels. But the jazz canon of this era is much more finite than people think. It's much broader than the reissue programs tell us. But anyway, I'm wrapping up today. You have a great day. Be safe. Peace.